The fog hung low over Maplewood like a secret no one wanted to speak. It was the kind of mist that made everything look softer, quieter, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Into that hush stepped Emily Harris, 16 years old, a single backpack slung over one shoulder, and an invisible weight pressing hard on the other. Her sneakers touched the concrete in front of Lincoln High for the first time, and something in the air shifted, though no one noticed. The school building loomed in front of her like a fortress of routine and reputations. Its brick facade, faded from decades of winters, held no welcome signs. A yellow school bus hissed and pulled away behind her, leaving her standing alone on the front walk. She took one slow breath. Her fingers curled instinctively at her sides. She could still feel the calluses on her knuckles, still hear the echo of her last sparring session in Detroit. Her old gym, the shouting coach, the sweat-stained mats. That was a different life now. This was supposed to be a clean slate. Let them think you're just another kid, her mother had said that morning, her voice tired but loving. You've got nothing to prove here. Start fresh. Stay invisible, Em. Please. Emily had nodded. She always nodded. But deep down, she knew something. You can only pretend for so long before the truth claws its way out. As she walked through the front doors, the hallways swallowed her up. Students moved like rivers, laughing, pushing, teasing, always watching. And Emily, with her quiet eyes and unreadable expression, became the perfect target. Not because she was weak, not because she was small, but because she didn't try to fit in. In a school like Lincoln High, silence wasn't peace. It was provocation. She made it to her locker and began twisting the dial. That's when she heard the first voice. Hey, look at that. Detroit finally sent us a gift. The voice belonged to Jake Anders, one of Brad Thompson's crew. Tall, red baseball cap, varsity jacket 2 sizes too big. He leaned against the row of lockers like he owned them. Emily didn't turn. Jake smirked. Not gonna say hi. In Maplewood, we're polite to each other. Guess they don't teach that where you're from. She finished with her locker, slid her books inside. You think being quiet makes you mysterious? Another voice chimed in. This one was sharper, crueler, Kyle, the one who always had something in his mouth, usually gum or someone else's secrets. I think, Emily said softly, you're wasting your time. Jake pushed himself off the lockers. That so? See, we've got a system here. New kids, especially ones from big cities, show a little respect. Otherwise, things get complicated. Emily turned. Her gaze met Jake's, steady, unreadable. I'm not here to cause trouble. Kyle laughed. That's good. Because Brad doesn't like troublemakers. Brad Thompson. The name hung in the air like a warning. Quarterback. Senior. Crown Prince of Cruelty. If Jake and Kyle were wolves, Brad was the alpha, the one who didn't bark unless he was ready to bite. Just leave her alone, a girl said from a few lockers down. Jessica Martin, curly hair and soft voice. Brave enough to speak, but not enough to fight. Jake gave Emily one last look before walking away. We'll be watching, Detroit. Classes passed in a blur. Teachers introduced themselves. Students whispered. Emily kept her head down. But beneath the surface, the tension coiled. Every sideways glance, every muttered comment felt like the tug of a string tightening around her ribs. At lunch, she found a quiet table in the back corner. Her tray was barely touched when someone dropped into the seat across from her. Brad. He didn't speak right away. He just sat there, watching her with the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. You think you're tough? He finally asked. Emily didn't answer. I hear your mom's a doctor. Must be nice, moving into town like you're better than everyone else. I didn't move here to be better, she said calmly. I moved here because we had to. Brad leaned forward. Doesn't matter why. What matters is you follow the rules. Emily tilted her head. Rules? He pointed around the cafeteria. Respect. Obedience. Pay your dues. You want peace? Then you buy it. How much? She asked. Brad's grin widened. $5 a day. Cheap rent for breathing space. Emily stood up. No thanks. The cafeteria quieted slightly. Enough for people nearby to sense the tension. Brad didn't like that. You don't get to say no to me. Emily looked at him, and for a moment, her mask slipped. The calm shattered. Not into anger, but into a look colder than fear. I just did. She walked away, leaving her tray behind. Whispers followed her. Some shocked. Some impressed. But most, scared. That night, over dinner, Sarah Harris noticed the tension in her daughter's jaw. How was school? Emily pushed peas around her plate. Fine. Emily. She looked up. It's just the usual. New place, new people. Promise me, her mom said gently. Promise me you'll stay out of trouble. I've worked so hard for this chance, for both of us. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. I promised. But promises are fragile things. And the shadows in Maplewood were starting to stir. Tomorrow would not be better. Tomorrow, the storm would begin. And no one, not even Emily, was ready for what was coming. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The next morning, the sun rose over Maplewood like it always did, unbothered, indifferent. Birds chirped, buses rumbled through the sleepy town, and Lincoln High yawned open its doors for another day of normalcy. But for Emily Harris, today would not be normal. It would be the beginning of something she had hoped to avoid. She stepped onto campus and felt the difference instantly. The hallway chatter slowed as she passed, like a ripple slicing through still water. Eyes lingered a little too long, whispers cut off mid-sentence. The wolves had picked up her scent. At her locker, her hands moved with muscle memory, spinning the dial, ignoring the tension building behind her. She had been through this before, new school, cold stares, silent judgment. But this time felt different. This wasn't just curiosity. It was something darker. Didn't think you'd come back, Jake said, suddenly beside her, his breath heavy with morning coffee and arrogance. Most new kids learn after one day to stay quiet and follow the rules. Emily glanced sideways. I don't do rules written in arrogance. Kyle appeared on the other side of her like a ghost. That mouth's gonna get you hurt, Detroit. She shut her locker with a soft thud, her face unreadable. If you're trying to intimidate me, you'll have to do better than bad coffee breath and recycled threats. Kyle's expression flickered, caught off guard. Jake's smile tightened. But before either of them could react, a familiar voice sliced through the air. Problem here? It was Mr. Harlow, the hall monitor, mid-40s, ex-military demeanor, clipboard always in hand. Jake and Kyle straightened. Just welcoming our new student, Jake said smoothly. We take hospitality seriously around here. Yeah, Kyle added. Real serious. Mr. Harlow gave them a long look, then turned to Emily. You okay, Miss Harris? I'm fine, she said, though her fists were clenched in her sleeves. Thanks. The two boys melted into the crowd, but Emily knew they weren't done. This wasn't retreat, it was strategy. By third period, their plan was already in motion. In chemistry class, Kyle accidentally shoved her as she was walking to her seat. Her notebook exploded across the floor. Before she could collect it, he stepped on a page, boot grinding into her notes like a warning. Oops, he said, not even pretending it wasn't intentional. The room laughed, some nervously, others cruelly. Emily didn't move. She stared at the boot on her paper, then looked up at Kyle. Next time, she said, her voice cold, wear better shoes. Those make you look desperate. Kyle's grin faltered. That wasn't the reaction he'd expected. She was supposed to shrink, maybe even cry. Instead, she handed him his own fear wrapped in a sentence. During lunch, it got worse. As she stood in line, a carton of milk slipped from Jake's tray and burst across her back. The cafeteria erupted in laughter. As if on cue, someone captured the moment on their phone, the click of a recording sealing the humiliation. Emily didn't flinch. She stepped out of line, milk dripping down her hoodie. Her jaw tightened as she walked toward the nearest restroom without a word. The wolves howled behind her, thinking she was retreating. But they didn't see her eyes. In the mirror, Emily peeled off the wet hoodie and stared at her reflection. The girl who looked back wasn't angry. She was calculating. She had promised her mother she wouldn't fight. She had promised to stay invisible. But there's a limit to how long you can hold back a storm. And this storm was building. In the parking lot after school, as most students dispersed and the buses pulled away, Emily felt the presence before she saw him. "Hey," Brad's voice called out. He was leaning against his black pickup, arms crossed, posture relaxed like a lion watching prey. She kept walking. "I'm talking to you, Detroit." She stopped. Turned. He walked toward her, slow and confident. "You think you made me look weak yesterday? In front of everyone?" "I didn't do anything," she said flatly. Brad stepped closer. "You embarrassed me. And that doesn't go unpunished." "Then punish me," she said, stepping into his space. "Let's end this now." Brad raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You want to fight me?" "No," she said softly. "I want you to stop pretending you're untouchable." He laughed, loud and cruel. "I've been playing football since I was 10. My coach used to be in the NFL. I bench 300 pounds. You look like a stiff breeze could blow you away. Then you have nothing to be afraid of." Brad's smile faded. Something in her voice had changed. It wasn't bravado. It was certainty. A deep, unsettling calm. "Don't test me, little girl," he growled. But Emily didn't flinch. She looked him in the eye and said, "Brad, if you keep pushing, you'll find out exactly who I am. And I promise you, you won't like the answer." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, fists clenched, mind racing. Because for the first time in a long time, Brad Thompson didn't know if he was still the predator. Somewhere deep inside, a doubt had been planted. And doubt is the beginning of fear. Tomorrow wasn't just another day anymore. Tomorrow, someone would break. And the first crack had already formed. The next day, the school air tasted like tension, stale and sharp. Emily walked through the front gates of Lincoln High with the same expressionless mask she wore every morning, but beneath that calm surface, her mind was a storm. She could feel the shift, the way people's gazes lingered a second longer, the way conversations lowered when she passed. Her name wasn't just whispered anymore, it was studied, weighed, calculated. Word had spread. Brad had been challenged, and somehow, someway, she had walked away. But Brad wasn't the kind of guy who let things go. Emily knew that. She'd known boys like him before, the ones who confused control with strength, who mistook cruelty for power. In Detroit, she'd seen them on the streets, in the gyms, in the ring. The difference was, in Detroit, they were grown men. Here, they were just scared boys wearing borrowed confidence. But scared boys could still be dangerous, especially when their ego was bleeding. As she walked into her homeroom, she noticed a folded piece of paper stuck through the slits of her locker. It wasn't a love note or a joke. It was a warning. Just a single sentence, printed in black ink on plain white paper: pay your dues or pay the price. No name. No signature. But she didn't need one. The message was clear. Brad's system had rules. $5 a day. That was the price of peace. For others, it was just a nuisance. For Emily, it was an insult. A tax for existing. She crumpled the note slowly, methodically, and slid it into her pocket. Not out of fear, but out of restraint. Because every time they poked the sleeping lion inside her, it stirred a little more. By lunchtime, the games escalated. When she sat at her usual spot in the back of the cafeteria, her tray mysteriously vanished. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, replaced with a pile of ketchup packets oozing onto the table. Behind her, laughter bubbled like poison. She turned around. Brad sat 3 tables away, surrounded by his pack. He didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He just stared, waiting. Daring her to react. Emily stood slowly, wiped her hands on a napkin, and walked away without a word. Every step she took felt like a hammer nailing down her resolve. She had tried silence. She had tried peace. But silence in the face of oppression isn't kindness, it's surrender. And she wasn't made for surrender. After school, she didn't head straight home. Instead, she walked the long way, past the football field, around the empty lot behind the gym. That's where she found him, Coach Malcolm, the janitor, the one person who always noticed everything but never said a word unless it mattered. He was sweeping near the back entrance when she appeared. "Figured you'd come find me," he said, without looking up. "You see everything?" she asked. "Enough," he replied. "You told me you'd keep your promise. That you wouldn't fight." "I haven't," she said. "But they keep pushing. And there's only so far I can bend before I break." Coach Malcolm leaned on his broom, looking at her like someone who had seen too many kids fall apart under the weight of the world. "Let me tell you something about boys like Brad. They live off fear. It's their fuel. You take that away, and they got nothing. Then why does everyone still obey him? Because they're afraid to be the first to stop." Emily's jaw tightened. "I'm not." "I know," he said. "But listen to me carefully, girl. If you decide to act, do it smart. Not in the open. Not where they can twist it against you. No witnesses. No lasting damage. You fight like a shadow." She nodded slowly. "I've been fighting shadows my whole life." He looked her dead in the eye. "Then you know, when it's time to hit, you hit first, you hit fast, and you hit like the world depends on it." That night, at dinner, her mother noticed the bruise on Emily's wrist. "What happened?" she asked, voice tense. "Locker door." "Just slipped," Emily lied. Sarah narrowed her eyes. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" Emily hesitated. "Yes," she said eventually. But it wasn't the truth. Not because she didn't trust her mother, but because she didn't want her to worry. Because if this thing escalated, and it would, then Emily needed to be ready. She couldn't afford fear. Not hers. Not her mom's. Only focus. That evening, she sat on the floor of her room, legs crossed, lights off. She wrapped her hands with old tape, faded, stained with time. Her fingers moved automatically, like they remembered who she used to be. Each wrap around her knuckles was a promise: I will not be broken. I will not be used. I will not pay to breathe. The next day, she slipped a crisp $5 bill into an envelope and left it in Brad's locker. Not because she gave in. But because she wanted him to think she had. That was his mistake. He mistook quiet for submission. He thought the storm had passed. But storms don't pass. They gather. And then they strike. The cafeteria buzzed with the chaotic rhythm of teenage noise, laughter too loud, trays clattering, sports banter flying from table to table. Emily moved through it like smoke, unseen but present, her eyes scanning, calculating. She had spent the morning avoiding confrontation, playing the role Brad expected her to play, the girl who backed down. But Emily understood something Brad didn't. Strength wasn't about who struck first in public, but who endured, who planned, who could wait. She slid into her usual corner table, the one farthest from the noise, back to the wall. Today she had brought a book, not because she wanted to read, but because it was something to look at other than the sharks circling her. She felt it before she saw it, Brad's presence, a disruption in the air. And then his voice, low but sharp like a knife pressed to her ribs. "Smells like Detroit's finest garbage just walked in." Laughter erupted around his table. Jake and Kyle grinned like trained dogs waiting for a command. Emily didn't look up. She calmly unscrewed her thermos cap, steam rising from the tomato soup she'd packed that morning. It was warm, comforting, like a piece of home. She took a slow sip. Then a sudden shadow loomed. Before she could process it, her entire tray flipped, and the thermos exploded in her lap. Red liquid soaked through her jeans, splattered across her shirt. Gasps echoed. Then the laughter, loud, unfiltered, venomous. Phones came out. Someone was filming. Someone always was. Emily sat there, unmoving. Soup ran down her thighs in thick lines. Her hands, once still, curled into fists in her lap. Brad stood over her, pretending innocence. "Oops," he said, grinning. "Clumsy me." The cafeteria roared. Kyle whistled. "Guess you'll need a new outfit, Detroit." Emily's breathing was shallow, eyes locked onto the puddle pooling beneath her chair. Her mind wasn't here anymore. It was back in Detroit. Back on the mats. Back when her coach shouted, "Control is everything. You win the moment you decide not to react like they want you to." She stood up. Not in anger. Not in shame. Just, slowly. The soup dripped from her pants, from her fingertips. Her shirt clung to her skin. The laughter died. Something about the way she stood, calm, upright, unshaken, was more terrifying than rage. She looked Brad straight in the eye. "You just made a big mistake." It wasn't loud. But it didn't have to be. Because silence followed her words like thunder after lightning. Brad smirked, trying to keep the upper hand. "Or what? You gonna cry? Call your mommy?" Emily's eyes didn't flinch. "I was hoping you wouldn't force me to show you who I really am." Brad's sneer faltered, just for a split second. That was all Emily needed to know, he was starting to feel it. The shift. The storm on the horizon. She walked past him, soup dripping with every step. No one moved to block her. No one dared laugh again. In the girls' restroom, she peeled off her shirt and rinsed her hands in the cold water. Her reflection stared back, soaked, stained, but unshaken. She looked into her own eyes and said quietly, "Enough." That night, she didn't eat dinner. Her mother knocked on her door. "Emily." "Homework," she replied. She wasn't lying. She had work to do. But it wasn't algebra. It wasn't vocabulary. It was war. She pulled out a small, beat-up notebook from her gym bag, the one she hadn't opened since Detroit. Inside were old sparring diagrams, pressure point maps, and notes from Coach Felix. On the back cover were the words he always made her repeat: "You don't fight because you're angry. You fight because silence doesn't always keep you safe." She circled one phrase 3 times. Solar plexus. That night, Emily didn't sleep. She planned. She timed. She visualized. Because tomorrow, there would be no cameras. No laughter. No second takes. Tomorrow, she would strike back. And not a soul would see it coming. The next afternoon, the sky above Lincoln High was smeared with the gray of an oncoming storm, as if the world itself sensed what was about to unfold. Emily waited until the final bell rang and the hallways began to empty in their usual stampede of half-eager freedom. She moved slower than the others, slipping between the noise, eyes steady, thoughts razor-sharp. Outside, the parking lot buzzed with the usual post-school chaos, engines revving, music blasting from open car windows, cliques forming like magnets across the pavement. And there he was. Brad Thompson, king of the asphalt jungle, leaned against the side of his black pickup truck like he owned the oxygen around it. Jake and Kyle flanked him, but when they saw Emily approaching, Jake nudged Brad. "You've got company," he muttered, voice tinged with amusement. Brad looked up, cocky as ever. "Didn't expect to see you out here, princess." Emily stopped about 5 feet from him, her hands loose at her sides, body relaxed. "We need to talk." Brad's grin widened. "Oh. You finally realized this school doesn't run on Detroit street rules." "No," she said quietly. "I realized it's time to end this." That pulled a short laugh from Jake. Kyle crossed his arms. "You sure about that, Cupcake?" Brad stepped forward, his height casting a shadow over her smaller frame. "You want to end this? You want to fight me? You do know I've been playing football since I was 10. My coach was NFL. I can bench 300 pounds. And you? You look like a stiff breeze could blow you away." Emily tilted her head slightly. "Then you have nothing to be afraid of, do you?" For a moment, something shifted in Brad's eyes. Doubt, almost too subtle to catch. Then it vanished behind his usual bravado. "Fine," he said. "You want to be a hero? You got your chance." He cracked his knuckles. "Let's go." "Not here," Emily said. "Too many eyes. Too many phones. Too many lies." Brad looked around. Half the parking lot was still full of students. Some had already noticed them. "Where then?" "Behind the maintenance building," she said. 2 minutes. Just you and me." "Why should I, unless," she cut in, "you're not as fearless as you pretend to be." That did it. Brad clenched his jaw. "Jake, Kyle, stay here." "But," I said, "stay." Emily walked toward the edge of the lot, her pace unhurried. Brad followed. The wind picked up, stirring leaves and dust across the asphalt. Behind the gym and beside the maintenance shed, the world grew quieter. No students. No cameras. Just the distant hum of cars and the crunch of gravel under shoes. Emily turned to face him. "One hit," she said. "That's all I need." Brad scoffed. "You're delusional." He lunged. It was fast for someone who'd only fought on turf and under rules. His right hand swung out wide, aiming for her shoulder, maybe her throat. But it never landed. Emily sidestepped, pivoted on her back foot, and delivered a short, brutal left straight into his solar plexus. It wasn't showy. It wasn't cinematic. It was perfect. The impact was silent, but Brad's gasp wasn't. It sounded like all the air in his chest had suddenly been vacuumed out. He doubled over, eyes wide, mouth opening in disbelief, in pain, in humiliation. Emily stepped back. "That's why you don't corner people who were taught how to survive." Brad crumpled to his knees, gasping like a drowning man. His muscles betrayed him. His pride shattered on concrete. He looked up at her, no longer the predator, but the prey. "I moved here to live a normal life," she said, her voice calm, even gentle. "I didn't want this. I didn't want to be feared. But you didn't give me a choice." Brad's hands trembled against the pavement. "I didn't know," Emily's eyes narrowed. No, you didn't care. She turned and walked away, not out of arrogance, but resolution. Her shoulders didn't sag. Her steps didn't falter. She left Brad behind, coughing, clutching his ribs, broken not by force, but by truth. The storm had come and gone in less than 60 seconds. And the only people who would ever understand what had happened were the ones who'd feel the ripple effects. Tomorrow, the whispers would begin. The balance would shift. And the wolves would learn that even the quietest girl can be the most dangerous storm they never saw coming. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The next morning, Lincoln High wasn't the same. Not because the walls had changed or the lockers had moved, but because silence had replaced the usual chaos. A thick, humming silence, heavy with whispers no one dared say aloud. The school breathed differently, as if it had witnessed a ghost, one wearing jeans stained with soup and eyes that didn't flinch. Emily walked through the front doors at exactly 7:52 a.m., just like every other day. But this time, no one bumped her shoulder. No one hissed, "Detroit," under their breath. Instead, students stepped aside. Not with malice. With reverence. With fear. She didn't smile, didn't even look up, but she saw it in her periphery, the way eyes tracked her movements like she was walking in slow motion. The walls weren't whispering this time. They were listening. At her locker, she reached for her books. The moment her hand touched the lock, a voice behind her made her pause. Emily. It was Brad. He stood alone. No Jake. No Kyle. Just Brad. And that said everything. She turned slowly. He didn't look like the same boy from the parking lot. The arrogance was gone. His face was pale, posture unsure. His right hand rubbed his ribs out of habit, almost like he wanted her to see it, to know he still hurt. But Emily didn't care about the bruise. She cared about the eyes. Because the boy who once looked at her like prey now couldn't hold her gaze for more than a second. "I'm sorry," he said, loud enough for everyone within 10 feet to hear. Conversations froze. Footsteps stopped. A dozen eyes flicked toward them. Emily raised an eyebrow. Brad swallowed. "What I did in the cafeteria, what I said, all of it. It was wrong." His voice trembled, not from pain but exposure. "I was a jerk. A coward. You didn't deserve that." A strange silence followed. Not mocking, not doubtful. It was the silence of reckoning. The crowd didn't laugh. They didn't cheer. They simply stared, waiting to see what Emily would do next. She nodded once. That was all. No theatrics. No speech. And somehow, it made everything heavier. Brad took a shaky breath, turned, and walked away. A hand touched Emily's arm gently. Jessica Martin. She looked nervous, but grateful. "That was something," Jessica said quietly. "He never apologizes." "I didn't need it," Emily replied. "I think we did," Jessica whispered. They walked to class together. People parted for them without a word. Something fundamental had shifted overnight. Brad Thompson, the king of Lincoln High, had bent the knee, not to violence, not to humiliation, but to the undeniable truth that power doesn't come from volume. It comes from presence. From the refusal to break. By fourth period, Emily was a ghost and a legend in the same body. Teachers glanced at her a little longer than before. Girls who had once rolled their eyes in dismissal now watched her like she held the answers to a test they never studied for. Boys kept their distance, no longer out of mockery, but uncertainty. Because no one really understood how someone like Emily, so quiet, so controlled, had brought down the biggest predator in the pack without shouting, without threats, with just one clean, calculated strike. But what no one saw, not even Jessica, was that Emily didn't feel victorious. She felt tired. That afternoon, as the last bell rang and students poured into the halls like water from a burst dam, Jessica caught up to her near the school exit. Her voice was low, urgent. "Emily, can we talk?" "Sure. There's something going on." I didn't know how to say anything until now, but Jessica glanced around, made sure no one was listening. "There's a group of guys from Westside. They hang around the bus stop after school. They don't touch anyone. Not really. But they say things. Creepy things. Threatening things." Emily's spine stiffened. "Yesterday, one of them tried to grab my hand. When I pulled away, he said next time, I wouldn't be able to." "Who else knows?" "Some of the girls. No one wants to talk about it. They think it'll just make it worse." Emily's eyes darkened, but her voice remained flat. "Where's the bus stop?" Jessica hesitated. "Emily, I didn't tell you so you do something crazy." "I'm not going to do something crazy," she said. "I'm going to do something necessary." Jessica looked at her, unsure whether to be afraid or relieved. That evening, Emily didn't go straight home. She sat at the edge of the bus stop bench in her hoodie and jeans, hood up, backpack on her lap. Waiting. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Then headlights rolled up. 4 boys stepped out of a pickup. Loud. Laughing. Reeking of beer and cheap confidence. They sauntered up to the bench like they'd done it 100 times. One of them spotted her. Well, he said. "New face. You're not from Lincoln, are you?" Emily said nothing. Another boy circled behind her. "You look like the type that doesn't talk much." "That's okay. We like quiet girls." The first one leaned in. "What's your name, sweetheart?" She stood slowly, pulling down her hood. Silence. Recognition flickered across their faces. The girl from Lincoln. The one who took down Brad. The storm in small form. "I need to talk to your leader," she said. The tallest of them, stocky and arrogant, chuckled. "That'd be me. Travis. What's on your mind?" "You're going to leave the girls from Lincoln alone." He laughed. "Or what?" Emily didn't answer with words. She answered with motion. One fluid step forward. One pivot. One elbow. The boy behind her collapsed, wheezing, on the pavement. The others froze. Travis took a step back. "What the hell?" Emily faced him. "That was a warning. The next won't be so gentle. You've had your fun. It's over." He stared at her like she was something out of a nightmare. No one moved. "Pick up your friend," she said. "And disappear." Travis hesitated. Then, slowly, he bent down, lifted the groaning boy, and backed away. They left without another word. Emily stood in the glow of the streetlight, breath steady, gaze calm. For the second time in 2 days, the monsters had fled from the girl they thought couldn't fight. But this wasn't just about fists anymore. It was about fear. And Emily Harris had just taught them how it felt. By Monday morning, the story had spread like wildfire. Nobody knew exactly what had happened at the bus stop, but everyone knew Emily Harris had been there, and afterward, Travis and his friends hadn't shown their faces anywhere near Lincoln High. It wasn't gossip anymore, it was legend. In homeroom, students whispered in tight clusters, eyes darting toward Emily as if she were something dangerous wrapped in denim and silence. Some looked at her with awe. Others with apprehension. But all of them looked. And for the first time in her life, Emily felt something she couldn't explain. She wasn't invisible anymore. But she wasn't exactly seen either. She was being watched, studied, dissected like a mystery people were afraid to solve. She moved through the school like a shadow that had learned how to cast light. And while her face remained neutral, inside she felt the pulse of something new, responsibility. Between second and third period, Jessica caught up with her in the hall, walking fast, eyes wide, voice lowered. "They're back," she said. Emily's heart skipped. "Where?" "Not them exactly," Jessica said. "But different guys. Another group from West Side. Same attitude. Same threats. They were at the bus stop this morning." Emily's jaw tightened. "Did they do anything?" "No. Not yet. But one of them said, 'We heard your protector's not around in the mornings.'" That hit Emily harder than she expected. She'd sent a message, but it hadn't been enough. She wasn't dealing with one group of bullies. She was dealing with a culture, one that fed on silence, that multiplied in the cracks of fear. She thought of her mother's voice again. "Stay invisible, Em. Please." But invisible girls didn't stop predators. Invisible girls didn't protect the ones too scared to speak. And Emily wasn't invisible anymore. That afternoon, after the final bell, Emily waited outside the school gates. Jessica was beside her, along with 3 other girls, Sophia, Hannah, and Mel. None of them had spoken more than a sentence to her before now, but they stood close, drawn together by something deeper than friendship. Fear. Shared fear. As the sun began to dip below the roofline of the gym, a truck rumbled up. It wasn't the same one as before, but the energy was the same, loud music, laughter that didn't sound like joy, eyes scanning for vulnerability. 4 boys stepped out, all wearing the smug smirk of assumed dominance. One of them, tall, pale, sharp features, looked straight at Jessica. "There she is," he said. "You didn't give me a chance to say goodbye yesterday." Emily stepped forward. The boy's gaze shifted. "And you must be the famous Emily." "Leave now," she said, calm as ice. He chuckled. "Or what? You gonna call the principal? Post about us on TikTok?" "No," Emily said. "I'm going to make sure you leave in a way that you'll never forget." The boy moved closer. "You don't scare me." "Then you're not paying attention." His hand reached out toward Jessica's shoulder. That was his mistake. Before his fingers could graze her, Emily stepped sideways, grabbed his wrist, twisted it down and back. He yelped, dropped to one knee. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes were locked on the others. "I want you all to understand something," she said quietly. "This isn't about looking tough. This is about making sure you never do this to anyone again." One of the other boys, a stocky brunette with gold teeth, lunged forward. Emily released the first boy and turned with surgical speed. Her elbow landed clean in the second boy's gut. He folded instantly, gasping, eyes wide with disbelief. She didn't even breathe hard. "Who's next?" she asked, looking directly at the 2 still standing. They stared at her like she wasn't a girl anymore, but a force. A reckoning. They picked up their friends and stumbled back to the truck. No more threats. No more smiles. The engine started, and within seconds, they were gone. Silence returned to the bus stop. Jessica's voice trembled. "How did you do that?" Emily shrugged. "Years of practice." "No, I mean, how did you stay so calm?" "Because I've been here before. The only difference is now, I don't walk away." The girls surrounded her like orbiting moons, pulled by a gravity they hadn't known they needed. Something shifted again that day. Not in the halls or in whispers, but in the way the girls stood taller. Walked prouder. And it wasn't because they were fearless. It was because someone had shown them they didn't have to be. That night, Emily sat in her room staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the girls who had gone through what Jessica had. All the girls who had no one to stand up for them. And she realized something terrifying and beautiful: she couldn't protect them all. But maybe, just maybe, she could teach them to protect themselves. And once that thought took root, it wouldn't let go. The sun dipped low, casting the bus stop in a soft orange glow that made everything look safer than it really was. Emily sat alone on the bench, her backpack at her feet, hood drawn up, pretending to scroll through her phone. The concrete beneath her was cool, rough, and her muscles hummed with the energy of quiet focus. She wasn't here to wait for a bus. She was here to set a boundary. A hard one. Behind the bushes to her left, Jessica and the other girls waited, just out of sight, unsure if they were witnesses or accomplices. Emily hadn't told them much, just enough for them to understand something was going to happen and that it mattered they saw it. Not because she needed their help, but because they needed to see what standing up looked like. The truck rolled up late, like it knew anticipation would do half the work. The engine roared to a stop, and 4 boys jumped down, laughing like they owned the air. Different faces this time. Different muscles. But the same hunger for dominance, the same dead glint in their eyes that came from never being told no, and believing that made them strong. Their leader, Travis, was tall, with a grin that looked painted on. He cracked his knuckles and walked straight toward Emily. "Look who's waiting for us," he said. "Our little princess from Lincoln." Emily didn't look up. "We need to talk." "Oh, we will," Travis smirked, stepping into her space. "But first, I think we'll get acquainted." He reached out to touch her cheek, and that's when it changed. Emily's elbow shot back behind her, slamming with pinpoint precision into the stomach of the boy who had tried to sneak behind her. He went down without a sound, just a sickening thud and the rasp of air being stolen from lungs. Travis's grin faltered. What the hell was that? Emily rose slowly, eyes locked on him. "That was your warning." "You think I'm scared of you," he spat. "I know you are," she replied. And then she moved. Not out of panic. Not out of anger. Out of complete, calculated precision. Her left leg swept forward, knocking Travis's knee out from under him, and before gravity could claim him, her fist met his nose with a dull crack. Blood blossomed instantly. He hit the ground hard, groaning, hands covering his face. The other 2 boys froze, caught between disbelief and panic. "Pick him up," Emily said. "Now." They didn't move. She took a single step forward. "I said pick him up and leave. And if I ever see any of you near these girls again, I won't stop at warnings." One of the boys knelt down, pulling Travis's semi-conscious body off the pavement. The other backed toward the truck without another word. No more bravado. No more laughter. Just raw, undeniable fear. They scrambled into the vehicle and peeled away in a cloud of dust and humiliation. Silence returned. Emily stood alone in the fading light, the tension evaporating from her limbs like mist. Jessica emerged slowly from the bushes, followed by the others. "That was," she started, her voice trailing off. "Necessary," Emily finished. "Are you okay?" Jessica asked. Emily looked at her, then at the others. "They're not coming back. But there will be others. There always are. What matters is how we respond. Not once. Every time." Sophia stepped forward. "Can you teach us?" "Teach you what?" Emily asked. "How to fight," Hannah said. "How to not feel helpless." Emily nodded once, the decision already made long before they asked. "Meet me after school. Monday. Gymnasium. No excuses." That night, Emily lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows from the streetlight cutting across her room like quiet blades. Her knuckles were sore. Her body ached in small, familiar ways. But what hurt more was the knowledge that all this, every confrontation, every strike, was just a symptom of something bigger. And she was still only one girl. But one girl could be enough. If she could turn fear into strength, silence into voice, hesitation into action, not just for herself, but for others, then maybe the world didn't need another hero. It just needed a spark. And tomorrow, she would light it. The headlines came first. Local blogs, student forums, then the community paper, Lincoln High girl hospitalizes West Side teen in parking lot altercation. No context, no truth, just impact. Within 48 hours, Emily's name was everywhere, and not as the quiet girl who had stood up against bullies, but as a threat. The story twisted itself faster than she could catch it, reshaping reality into a version where she was the aggressor and Travis Miller was the poor victim of a violent outburst. Her mother found out through a phone call from the school board. The words, disciplinary hearing, and, possible criminal charges, were spoken with cold efficiency, each syllable another nail in the coffin of the normal life they had tried so hard to build. At the kitchen table that night, Sarah Harris looked at her daughter like she was seeing her for the first time. "Emily, tell me the truth. All of it." Emily's voice was steady. "They came after the girls again. They touched Jessica. One of them grabbed me. I did what I had to do." "Did you have to hit him that hard?" "If I hadn't, he would have thought he could come back. They all would have." Sarah's shoulders sank. "They're saying he has a broken nose and a mild concussion." "He'll heal," Emily said. "But if I let him keep going, someone else wouldn't." The disciplinary hearing was scheduled for Friday morning in the school auditorium, a stage that had once hosted talent shows and homecoming speeches now turned into a courtroom of whispered judgments. Emily walked in wearing black jeans and a plain hoodie, her hair tied back, her expression unreadable. Sarah sat beside her, hands clenched in her lap. Across the room, Travis Miller sat with a neck brace that looked more dramatic than necessary, flanked by his lawyer and his mother, whose theatrical sobs echoed louder than any gavel. The principal, Mr. Anderson, called the room to order. "Today's purpose is not to assign guilt, but to determine whether Emily Harris's actions were appropriate within the context of student conduct and school safety." The lawyer rose. "With all due respect, sir, we believe her actions extend beyond student conduct. We believe they constitute assault." Murmurs rippled through the auditorium. Teachers shifted uncomfortably. Students exchanged looks. Emily remained still. Jessica was called as the first witness. Her voice shook at first but steadied with each word. "Travis and his friends had been harassing us for weeks. They waited at the bus stop. They followed us. They threatened us. That day, he tried to grab me." Emily stopped him. "Did she provoke the altercation?" the lawyer asked. "No," Jessica replied. "She prevented one." Other students were called up, Sophia, Mel, even a freshman who had overheard the boys bragging about shutting that fighter girl down. Slowly, the narrative cracked. Emily wasn't the aggressor. She was the one who stood in the way. Finally, it was her turn. She stood before the room, not defensive, not apologetic, but unshakably honest. "I didn't ask to be here. I didn't ask to be the one who had to do something. But no one else was going to stop them. And I've seen what happens when you stay silent. My coach used to tell me, real strength isn't about causing pain. It's about knowing when to stop. That day, I used the minimum force I needed to stop a threat. Nothing more." She looked toward Travis, whose eyes darted away. "And I would do it again." The hearing ended in tense silence. The board took the matter under review. But the court of public opinion had already begun to sway. Outside the auditorium, dozens of students waited, some holding signs, others just standing there, unified by something they didn't fully understand. A spark had caught. And Emily, whether she wanted to be or not, had become more than a student. More than a fighter. She was a symbol. But symbols come with consequences. And Emily knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The courthouse smelled of old paper, polished wood, and tension. It wasn't a grand building, just a small, aging structure on Maplewood's main street, but to Emily, it felt like walking into the belly of something ancient and judgmental. The school hearing had ended in administrative purgatory, but now the Miller family had pushed further, filing charges for assault and demanding accountability. Travis's mother had taken her grief to every local news station that would listen, painting Emily as a violent delinquent, a trained fighter gone rogue, a danger to society hiding behind a school uniform. The town was split down the middle, half seeing Emily as a hero who had protected the weak, the other half swallowing the media narrative that she'd gone too far, that she'd lost control. Emily sat in the courtroom, hands folded tightly in her lap, wearing her most neutral clothes and her calmest expression. Her mother sat beside her, pale but composed, like a candle still burning in a windstorm. Across the aisle, Travis sat smugly in his sling and neck brace, clearly coached, clearly rehearsed. His lawyer stood with a voice soaked in disdain. "Let's be clear, Your Honor. The defendant is not a normal high school student. She is a trained combatant, with years of martial arts experience. This was not self-defense. This was targeted violence." Emily's attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Ms. Adler, rose quietly. "Your Honor, what Emily Harris did was not violence. It was protection. And when no one else would step up, she did." Jessica was called to the stand first. Her voice trembled, but she did not look away from the jury. "They said disgusting things. They followed us. They laughed when we got scared. That day, Travis tried to grab me. Emily didn't attack him. She stopped him." The prosecution tried to rattle her, asking about Emily's fighting background. "Yes," Jessica admitted. "Emily trained for years. But if she wanted to hurt him, really hurt him, she could have. She didn't. She just made sure he couldn't hurt us." The courtroom was quiet. The jury, a mixture of old townspeople and a few younger faces, watched closely. When Emily took the stand, the room tensed. She looked small in the wooden box, her voice soft but firm. "My coach always told me, strength isn't about how hard you hit, it's about when you choose not to. That day, I had one goal. Stop the threat. I didn't go after them. I didn't want to fight. But when they wouldn't stop, I made sure they couldn't keep going. Not that day. Not to those girls." The prosecutor tried to twist her words. "So you admit you struck him with the intent to harm?" "No," Emily said. "I struck him with the intent to end what he started." "But you could have walked away, couldn't you? And left Jessica to be grabbed? Left Sophia to be cornered?" "No, sir. I couldn't. And I wouldn't." The judge narrowed his eyes. "Watch your phrasing, counselor," he warned the prosecutor. Ms. Adler leaned forward. "Emily, what did you feel in that moment?" "Responsibility," she said without hesitation. "For all the girls who didn't have a voice before. And for the ones watching, learning what happens when you finally say, enough." The trial stretched into the afternoon. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs, but none loud enough to disturb the process. Finally, the lawyers delivered their closing statements. One filled with dire warnings about unchecked violence in schools, the other a plea for understanding, for justice that included context and truth. When the jury left to deliberate, Emily sat still. Her mother reached over and took her hand for the first time in days. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "No matter what happens." Time dragged like a stone across sand. Minutes stretched into an hour. The jury returned. The foreman stood. The judge asked for the verdict. "On the charge of assault in the second degree, we find the defendant, Emily Harris, not guilty." A pause. Then a wave of sound erupted, gasps, then applause, quickly silenced by the gavel. Emily sat frozen, barely breathing. Her mother turned to her, tears already running down her face. You did it, she whispered. But Emily didn't feel victorious. Not exactly. What she felt was a strange, quiet relief. Not because she had been proven right, but because the truth had been louder than the lies. When she left the courthouse, the sun was already setting, casting the pavement in long, golden shadows. Students, parents, teachers, they were all there, waiting, clapping, not cheering but acknowledging. She didn't wave. She didn't cry. She just walked forward. Because this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. And she knew, with more certainty than ever, that some storms don't just pass. Some storms become the sky itself. The Monday after the verdict, Lincoln High felt like a new place layered over an old one. The same brick walls, the same fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the same lunch menu and school bells. But underneath that sameness, a quiet transformation hummed. For the first time in a long time, students walked the halls without looking over their shoulders. Conversations flowed not in whispers of fear, but in cautious hope. Bullies kept to themselves. The air had shifted, and it all traced back to one name, Emily Harris. She didn't walk into school like a conqueror. There was no grand entrance, no self-satisfied smirk. She moved like she always did, head high, steps quiet, eyes clear. But now, when she passed by, students didn't just watch her. They nodded. They made space. They offered small gestures of respect, subtle, silent acknowledgments of what she had done and who she had become. Even teachers approached her differently. Mrs. Caldwell from English paused at her desk before class and said, "For what it's worth, I've never been prouder of a student I barely taught." Mr. Tran from chemistry clapped a hand on her shoulder and added, "If you ever run for mayor, let me know. I want to vote first." But Emily wasn't interested in being a symbol. She had felt the cost of every confrontation, on her bones, on her name, on her mother's face at night. She didn't want to be feared or idolized. What she wanted was clarity. Change. Direction. And that afternoon, she found it standing at the doorway of the gym, where 20 students, girls and boys both, waited in silence. Some wore gym clothes. Others looked nervous, clutching backpacks like shields. Among them was Jessica, Sophia, Mel, and even 3 freshmen Emily didn't recognize. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her. "You don't have to be strong to be here," she said. "You don't have to know how to fight. All you have to be is willing." A few students exchanged glances. One boy raised his hand. "Are you gonna teach us how to punch like you did in the parking lot?" Emily shook her head. "No. I'm going to teach you how to never need to. Fighting is the last option. The last breath. What I'm teaching you is how to be calm when others panic. How to stand when the ground shakes. How to carry yourself like someone who knows their worth." The first session was awkward. Some kids were too stiff, others too eager. But Emily moved among them with patience, correcting stances, demonstrating movements. She focused on control, balance, breathing, posture. Real strength isn't about force, she told them. It's about knowing when to walk away and when to make sure they never come back. Word spread fast. Within a week, the class tripled in size. By the second week, teachers started dropping by. By the third, the principal asked if they could open the gym for Emily's sessions officially after school hours. What had started as a quiet rebellion against fear had turned into something else, an awakening. The school began to feel safe. But Emily remained grounded. She stayed after every session to clean the mats, helped latecomers catch up, walked the nervous ones through drills. Her inbox filled with messages from students she'd never even spoken to, thanking her, asking for advice, sharing their stories. Some were heartbreaking. Some were hopeful. All were reminders of why she'd stepped into the storm in the first place. One evening, as she packed up alone, the gym lights humming low, the door creaked open. Brad Thompson walked in, hands in his pockets, not quite meeting her eyes. His once cocky swagger had faded into something slower, more careful. "Hey," he said. Emily nodded. "What's up?" He hesitated, then exhaled. "I wanted to thank you. Again. Not just for what you did, but for what it did to me." Emily tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Brad stepped forward, looking older than he had just a few months ago. "You could have humiliated me. Broken me. But you didn't. You showed me who I was. And who I didn't want to be anymore." He paused, then added, "I've been talking to the counselor. Thinking about majoring in social work." Emily's expression softened. "That's good. You'd be good at it." Brad smiled faintly. "I've still got a lot to make up for. Then start by showing up. Not just here. Everywhere." He nodded. "You ever need help with these classes? I mean, I'm not great at this stuff, but I can lift mats and keep the noise down." Emily extended a hand. Brad took it. When he left, she stood there for a moment longer, alone in the quiet gym, realizing that the echo of her fight had reached further than fists ever could. This was more than just about standing up. It was about staying up. About helping others rise too. And for the first time since her arrival in Maplewood, Emily Harris allowed herself a small smile, not because the war was over, but because the battle was finally becoming something beautiful. By the middle of October, the after-school program was no longer just a rumor or a curiosity, it was a movement. What had started as a quiet effort by a quiet girl now had over 40 students attending, 3 volunteer teachers helping supervise, and a whiteboard on the gym wall filled with daily goals that didn't just include physical drills but affirmations, conflict resolution strategies, and something Emily called internal defense, the practice of protecting your mind before your body. Emily arrived every day like clockwork, hair tied back, sleeves rolled, and with the same unshakable presence that now defined her. She'd never asked to lead, but leadership had followed her anyway. She didn't give speeches or quote motivational posters. She just showed up, did the work, and expected everyone else to do the same. Her consistency became its own kind of gravity. One Wednesday afternoon, Principal Anderson entered the gym unannounced. He stood in the doorway for several minutes, arms crossed, watching 30 students move in synchronized drills, shouting together on cue. When Emily noticed him, she stopped the group. "Water break," she said. Then she walked over. "Something wrong?" she asked. Anderson shook his head slowly. "No. Quite the opposite. I just wanted to see for myself what I've been hearing about." "And?" she asked. He glanced back at the room, where students laughed, stretched, and high-fived each other like teammates. "This might be the most engaged I've seen our students all year. You've done something special, Emily. This is what real change looks like." "It's not just me," she replied. "They're the ones showing up. I'm just giving them the space." "Still," he said, "you've created something we can't ignore. I'd like to talk about expanding this, making it an official school initiative. Maybe even partnering with other schools in the district." Emily's breath caught. The idea of turning this into something bigger felt exciting, and terrifying. "Let me think about it," she said. "Of course," he nodded. "But don't think too long. What you're building here, it matters." Later that evening, Emily sat on the floor of her bedroom, back against the bed, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed beside her, another message from a student thanking her for the session, asking if she could talk about something personal next week. She smiled, replied with a simple yes, and then opened her old notebook. The same one from Detroit. Its pages were worn now, creased with use, filled with drills and pressure point diagrams and quiet scribbles of lessons her coach had drilled into her. But there, in the margins of a page halfway through, were the words she kept coming back to: be the person you needed when you were younger. That was what she was doing, wasn't it? Giving others what she hadn't had. A voice. A shield. A path. The next day, something unexpected happened. Mr. Harlow, the hall monitor who rarely spoke more than 10 words at a time, stepped into the gym during warm-ups. He walked over to Emily, holding a duffel bag in one hand. "Mind if I join?" he asked. Emily blinked. "You want to, train?" "Not just me," he said, glancing over his shoulder. 2 more teachers stood outside the gym, Mrs. Ellis from math, and Coach Rodriguez from the track team. "We figured if our students are learning how to defend themselves," he said, "we should know how to support them." "You started a fire, kid. We just want to help keep it burning." That week, adults began joining the sessions. Some just watched. Others asked to participate. One parent emailed the school asking if there could be weekend classes. By Friday, the gym was fuller than ever, students on one half, teachers and parents practicing slowly on the other, everyone moving to the same rhythm of trust and transformation. For Emily, it wasn't about glory. It was about healing. About giving everyone, not just the strong, the permission to feel strong. As the session wrapped and students filtered out, laughing and chatting, Jessica stayed behind. She walked up to Emily with a hesitant smile. "You okay?" Emily asked. "Yeah," Jessica said. "I just wanted to say thank you. Not just for protecting us, but for giving us this. For giving us each other." Emily looked around the gym, the floor still echoing with energy. "I didn't give you anything," she said. "You took it. That's what makes it yours." That night, when Emily finally walked home under the clear October sky, she felt something new settle in her chest. Not pride. Not relief. Something deeper. She was no longer just the girl who had once punched a bully in a parking lot. She was the girl who helped others punch through their fear. A guardian. A guide. And even if the battles weren't over, she now knew exactly what she was fighting for. By the end of October, Emily had become something of a myth. Whispers followed her through the halls, not with fear anymore but with curiosity, admiration, and something close to hope. The after-school program she ran had evolved beyond anything she imagined, now a full-fledged movement drawing kids from other schools, students who had heard the stories, watched the shaky footage, and came not just to learn how to fight, but how to stand. But Emily didn't feel like a leader. Not really. She was still the girl who kept her voice low, who didn't enjoy the spotlight. Which was why the announcement during morning assembly blindsided her. As part of next week's fall festival, Principal Anderson said from the podium, Lincoln High will be hosting an exhibition night, open gym, student booths, food trucks, and a live demonstration of our self-defense program, led by Emily Harris. Applause thundered through the auditorium. Emily's heart dropped. She turned to look at Jessica, whose eyes were already wide. "I didn't agree to that," she whispered. Jessica winced. "I think the principal just made it official." That afternoon, Anderson met her after school. "I know it's sudden," he said, "but this is your chance to show the community what you've built." "This wasn't supposed to be about showing off," Emily replied. "I know," he said. "But people need to see it. And they need to see you. You've changed this school. It's time they see what strength looks like in motion." Emily didn't answer right away. That night, she sat in her room staring at the ceiling, the echoes of applause still ringing in her ears. Part of her hated the idea, being on display, performing in front of people who once dismissed her. But another part, a deeper part, understood that this was more than spectacle. This was about proving a point, that the quietest person in the room can be the one who shifts the ground under everyone's feet. The night of the event arrived fast. The gym had been transformed, string lights hung from the rafters, the bleachers were full, and a crowd of students, parents, teachers, and even local reporters buzzed with anticipation. At one end of the gym, a mat had been rolled out and ringed with chairs. Emily stood behind the curtain in the locker room, wrapping her hands with the same tape she'd used back in Detroit. Each motion was ritual, grounding, steady. She could hear the noise outside, the chants beginning. Emily. Emily. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with pressure. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about everyone who had ever been knocked down, silenced, told they were too weak, too small, too quiet. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. And now, for tonight's self-defense demonstration, please welcome the undefeated force behind the Lincoln High movement, Emily Harris. The curtain pulled back. The crowd erupted. Emily stepped into the lights, eyes forward, heart pounding but controlled. She wore her old training gear, black pants, gray tank, hair braided tightly down her back. Across from her stood Kelly Brennan, a 21-year-old amateur fighter from a nearby college gym who had volunteered for the exhibition. Kelly was tall, lean, and radiated confidence. "Don't worry," she said during the warm-up. "This is just a demo. Light sparring, nothing heavy." Emily nodded, her voice calm. "Understood." But once the bell rang, everything else disappeared. Kelly came in fast, testing with a few light jabs. Emily dodged, controlled, watching. She wasn't here to dominate. She was here to teach. The crowd quieted as the pace picked up. Kelly's punches came harder now, still within reason, but enough to draw gasps. Emily blocked, countered, moved like water around stone. And then, when the moment opened, she struck, not to harm, but to demonstrate control. One quick sweep of the leg, a pivot of the hips, and Kelly went down, gently, safely, landing on the mat with wide eyes and a grin of disbelief. She sat up, laughed, and raised Emily's hand. "Damn, girl. You're the real deal." The crowd stood in a wave of applause. Teachers clapped. Students cheered. Even Brad, sitting in the front row, whooped and gave a standing ovation. But Emily didn't smile for the cameras or bask in the praise. She walked to the center of the mat, took the microphone, and spoke quietly into the buzzing silence. This wasn't about winning. It was about proving something. That you don't have to be the loudest to be the strongest. That being small doesn't mean being powerless. That sometimes, the fight you avoid is the fight you win, and sometimes, the one you choose is the one that changes everything. And in that moment, the crowd wasn't just looking at a girl. They were looking at a storm in human form, a force that had started quietly, but now had a name, a face, and a future. The night ended with handshakes, interviews, congratulations. But long after the gym emptied, Emily stayed behind, alone, sitting on the edge of the mat, taping and retaping her hands, letting the silence wash over her. Because something had changed tonight. The world had seen her, not as a fighter, not as a symbol, but as the girl who had stepped into the ring and shown everyone that courage, once awakened, never sleeps again. The exhibition had barely ended when the first real challenge appeared, not from a student, not from a parent, but from someone entirely outside the school walls. 2 days after fight night, an email arrived in Principal Anderson's inbox from Mike Rotner, a former professional fighter and current organizer of the regional youth martial arts circuit. Word of Emily's demonstration had reached him through social media clips and local news, and he wanted to invite her to a public charity event, a friendly sparring match to raise awareness for anti-bullying programs. It was to be held at the Maplewood Civic Center, in a real ring, under real lights, in front of a real crowd. The opponent? Kelly Brennan's coach, a woman named Simone, the Giant, Kelly. 34 years old. 200 pounds of solid experience. Known for sparring with pros and never pulling punches. "We'll keep it clean," Rotner had written, "but we want to show people what courage really looks like." "And your girl? She's it." At first, Emily refused. She wasn't a performer. She wasn't doing any of this for attention. But something about the way the school community responded after the exhibition, how younger students approached her with stories, how parents started asking if she could speak at other schools, made her reconsider. If this fight could shine a light on what really mattered, if it could draw attention to the program she was building, maybe it wasn't just a fight. Maybe it was a message. The night of the match arrived with the kind of sharp electricity usually reserved for storms. The Civic Center was packed. Cameras rolled. Broadcasters prepped. Emily stood in the locker room, wrapping her hands, heart calm but focused. Her mother paced nearby, trying not to show the worry bleeding from her eyes. "You don't have to prove anything, sweetheart," she said. "I know," Emily replied. "That's why I can walk into the ring." When she emerged into the arena, the noise hit her like a wave. Hundreds of faces, bright lights, the roar of the crowd echoing in her chest. Across the ring stood Simone, tall, broad-shouldered, arms like steel cables. She smiled at Emily, but it wasn't a mocking smile. It was one of respect. "You've got guts, kid," she said. "Let's see if they hold up." The bell rang. Simone moved like a tank, slow but deliberate. Emily didn't try to overpower her, she knew better. She darted, slipped, countered, using her speed, her awareness. Simone's punches were heavy, thudding into the air, forcing Emily to stay mobile, stay sharp. For 2 rounds, they circled each other, a dance of skill versus experience, finesse against sheer power. Simone landed a glancing blow in round 3 that knocked Emily sideways, the crowd gasping as she hit the mat and rolled back to her feet. The referee asked if she wanted to continue. Emily nodded once, jaw tight. Her legs trembled, but her mind burned with clarity. She remembered Detroit. The hours spent on mats soaked in sweat. The voice of her coach whispering, "You don't fight the body. You fight the rhythm." And she felt it then, the rhythm of Simone's movements, the predictable shifts in weight, the delay between the jab and the pivot. Emily didn't need to hit harder. She needed to strike smarter. In round 4, she found the beat. She ducked low, twisted into a clean inside hook, then spun away before Simone could respond. The crowd screamed. Simone laughed, eyes bright. There she is. It wasn't about hurting Simone. It wasn't about winning. It was about standing there, unafraid, in the face of something larger than her, and refusing to be small. By the final bell, both fighters stood upright, breathing hard, sweat pouring, and neither had fallen again. The match was declared a draw. But in the eyes of the audience, there was no question who had made the bigger impact. When Simone raised Emily's hand for the crowd, the roar was deafening. Reporters rushed the ring. Microphones hovered. "How did it feel taking on someone twice your size?" one asked. Emily looked into the camera. "Size doesn't define strength. Heart does. And you don't need a ring to prove that. You need a reason." Later that night, long after the lights dimmed and the crowds left, Emily sat alone outside the Civic Center, sipping water, eyes fixed on the stars. Her body ached, but her soul felt lighter than ever. She had faced the giant, not just Simone, but the fear of failure, of exposure, of being seen too clearly. And she'd walked out stronger. Not because she won. But because she didn't hide. She didn't flinch. She didn't break. And in that quiet moment, under the open sky, she realized something that stayed with her forever: you don't become a giant by standing tall. You become one by standing firm when the world tells you to bow. The accolades from the charity match hadn't even cooled before the backlash began. It didn't come from students, teachers, or the school board, it came from the shadows that always gather when a light shines too brightly. Anonymous messages began flooding Emily's inbox. At first, they were vague, sarcastic remarks about attention-seeking, veiled jabs about how she loved playing the victim-turned-hero. But within days, the tone sharpened. "You think you're untouchable now," one message read. You embarrassed the wrong person back in Detroit. People don't forget that kind of thing. Another one, sent late at night, simply read, "You're not done paying." Emily stared at the screen, jaw clenched. She didn't recognize the sender, but the tone was familiar. It reeked of someone who had once tried to make her feel small. Someone she had already defeated, but whose ego hadn't healed. She tried brushing it off, but the messages didn't stop. They started targeting others. Jessica received one that mentioned her bus stop. A freshman named Ava found a message taped to her locker with a photo of Emily crossed out in red ink. Whoever this was, they weren't just watching. They were escalating. And Emily knew what that meant. This wasn't just cyberbullying. This was personal. Retaliation disguised as anonymous cruelty. She took the evidence to Principal Anderson, who took it seriously but admitted the limitations. "We're investigating. But unless we get a direct threat or a name, there's not much we can do. It's someone from the outside, clearly. We've alerted local authorities. I just want you to be careful." Emily nodded, but careful didn't mean hiding. She wasn't wired that way anymore. Instead, she doubled down on the program. She trained harder, spoke louder, stayed longer after sessions, teaching more than just strikes and counters, teaching resilience. But the pressure was mounting. Her sleep shortened. Her appetite faded. She started looking over her shoulder more than she wanted to admit. That Friday, after class, she found a message taped to the windshield of her mother's car in the hospital parking lot, "You can't fight shadows." That one made her freeze. She drove home in silence, hands gripping the wheel too tight. Her mother noticed instantly. "Emily. Talk to me." Emily hesitated, then told her everything. Not the watered-down version, but the real truth, about the threats, the messages, the gut-deep feeling that someone from her past was circling again. Sarah sat back, her face pale but composed. "We need to go to the police." "I already did. They're watching it now. But I think they're waiting for me to break." Her mother touched her hand. "Then we won't give them the satisfaction. But promise me something. If it escalates, you'll protect yourself. Not just physically. Emotionally. You don't have to carry this alone." That night, she barely slept. At 2 a.m., her phone buzzed. A video this time, grainy footage of her leaving the Civic Center after the Simone match. Shot from a distance. A voice, distorted, "Still walking like you think you're in control. Let's see how long that lasts." That was the tipping point. She called Anderson and forwarded everything. The next morning, security was increased at the school. Teachers were briefed. Emily was offered an escort between classes, which she declined. "I won't live in fear," she said. That's what they want. But her mind wasn't settled. Who was it? Someone from her old gym? A student she'd beaten in a tournament? One of the boys she'd shut down before leaving Detroit? She scoured old memories, every face, every name. One stood out. Marcus Decker. 17 when she'd left. Aggressive, cocky, hated being beaten, especially by a girl. She'd outmaneuvered him during sparring more than once, and the last time they'd faced off, he'd stormed out of the ring and smashed a locker mirror. Her coach had suspended him. He vanished soon after. And now, 2 years later, she had the sinking feeling he was back. She didn't tell her mother that name. Not yet. Instead, she started preparing, rereading old notebooks, sharpening her drills, running through worst-case scenarios. Because if Marcus was really out there, and if he had come looking for revenge, then this wasn't going to be another exhibition match. This was going to be a real fight. And she wasn't going to lose, not because of fear, not because of pride, but because too many people now looked to her as more than a fighter. They looked to her as proof that you could rise, even when the world tried to shove you down again and again. She stared at her reflection in the bedroom mirror and whispered the words she hadn't said in years. I'm ready. Not for revenge. Not for violence. But for whatever storm was coming next. Because this time, Emily Harris wasn't just defending herself. She was defending the movement she had built, the community she had created, and the voice she had finally found. Dinner that evening was quiet, but the kind of quiet that vibrates just under the surface. Emily pushed her food around on the plate, barely touching it, while her mother tried to keep the conversation normal, talking about a patient who'd brought in homemade banana bread, or the new nurse who sang show tunes while setting IVs. But the strain was there in her voice, every light anecdote clinging to an edge of worry. Finally, Sarah put her fork down and looked across the table. Emily, this isn't working. You haven't slept properly in days. You've stopped eating. You're scanning every hallway like it's a battlefield. I know you think you're being strong, but this isn't strength, it's survival mode. Emily's hands tightened in her lap. If I let my guard down now, someone gets hurt. I can feel it. Sarah's voice lowered. And if you keep living like this, that someone might be you. We need to do something. Emily stood, walked to the kitchen window, arms folded across her chest. The night outside pressed against the glass like a weight. I think I know who it is, she said finally. Sarah turned. Who? Marcus Decker. The name hung heavy in the room. He was in my old gym. We clashed. He hated that I could beat him. After a bad sparring match, he lost it. Smashed a mirror. Got suspended. Then disappeared. Nobody knew where he went. And now? Sarah asked. Now he's watching me. Or someone just like him. Someone who's angry that I'm not scared. Have you told the police? I don't have proof. Just instinct. And some blurry video. Not enough to move fast. Sarah walked over and placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Then we prepare. Not for him, whoever he is, but for anything. We don't run. But we don't wait for him to strike either. They sat back down at the table, and this time they didn't pretend to be normal. They mapped out a plan, who to call in an emergency, what doors stayed locked, which neighbors could be trusted. Emily agreed to carry pepper spray. They updated the security system and installed cameras on the front and back porch. But the most important thing they did was talk. Really talk. 4 hours. About Detroit. About fear. About how Sarah had once thought her daughter would either burn too bright or be snuffed out completely. But you found something else, Sarah said. You became the fire and the light. Emily almost smiled. The next day at school, Emily returned to the gym not just to train others but to train herself harder than she had in months. She worked her body past exhaustion, into muscle memory, into the space where doubt can't breathe. Brad walked in during her third round of striking drills and watched silently from the doorway. When she finally noticed him, dripping with sweat, chest heaving, he spoke carefully. You okay? No, she said. But I'm ready. Ready for what? For whatever's coming. For whoever thinks they can scare me back into silence. Brad nodded, then stepped forward. Let me help. She blinked. Help how? I know what it's like to be the bad guy who wakes up one day and realizes he doesn't want to be. Let me help you stay sharp. Let me take some hits. I owe you that. For the first time, Emily didn't see the old Brad, the king of cruelty. She saw someone else. Someone rebuilt. That week, Emily changed the program's tone. She added new drills. Taught how to fight off attackers from behind. How to break grips. How to use your voice like a weapon. The students noticed the shift, an urgency in her movements, an intensity in her instructions. But they followed without question. Because they trusted her. Because they believed in her. But when Ava approached her after class, wide-eyed, holding a crumpled piece of paper that had been slipped into her locker, Emily knew the storm was closer than she thought. The note read, "They'll fall with you." No name. No fingerprints. Just a threat. Not to Emily. To her students. That night, Emily sat in her room, lights off, window cracked, listening to the sound of the wind. Her taped hands rested on her knees. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, "It's almost time." She stared at the screen, then lifted her eyes to the darkness outside. "Then let it come," she whispered. Not with bravado. Not with arrogance. With certainty. Because she was no longer just a fighter. She was the line between fear and freedom. And someone had just made the mistake of crossing it. By the following Monday, Emily's gym wasn't just a school program, it was a sanctuary. Word had spread beyond Lincoln High. Students from neighboring schools began showing up, some curious, others desperate. A girl from West Side with a black eye and silence in her throat. A boy from North Ridge who hadn't spoken up since his brother got jumped. They came not because they wanted to learn how to fight, but because they wanted to feel safe somewhere, anywhere. Emily didn't turn anyone away. She didn't ask for reasons. She gave them space, direction, and a place where fear didn't get to make the rules. Principal Anderson, seeing the growing number, offered the school's auditorium twice a week. Local businesses donated mats, gloves, even water bottles with the words, "Stand. Don't sink," printed across the side. The phrase came from one of Emily's offhand comments during class, and it stuck. Students began tagging it on notebooks, carving it into the margins of textbooks. It wasn't just a motto, it was a promise. Emily wasn't trying to build a movement, but it was building anyway, one scared voice turned steady at a time. That week, Anderson brought in a counselor to observe the sessions. Her name was Dana Cole, a former trauma specialist turned youth advocate. She approached Emily after one of the longest classes yet. "You know this is bigger than self-defense, right?" Dana said. Emily wiped sweat from her brow and nodded. "I'm not just trying to teach them how to punch. I'm teaching them not to flinch when the world pushes." Dana smiled. "You're doing more in here than most adults do in a courtroom." "I'm doing what I wish someone had done for me," Emily replied. Dana's smile faded slightly. "That's why it works." Meanwhile, the messages continued. They didn't stop because Emily didn't break. They escalated because she didn't. More direct. More personal. Another one slipped into the mailbox at her house: "You don't get to win forever." Emily didn't flinch. She documented everything, handed it to the police, but stayed focused. Fear had learned it couldn't enter her through the front door anymore, so it tried the windows. But she'd already boarded those shut. She wasn't naive. She knew something was coming. But she also knew now she wouldn't be alone when it did. During the Wednesday session, Emily stood before 70 students, a crowd so large the gym buzzed with layered energy. She raised her voice just enough. Most people think bravery is doing something crazy. Charging in. Yelling loud. Throwing the first punch. That's not bravery. Bravery is waking up when you don't want to. It's walking into school even when you're scared. It's choosing to stay, to try, when every part of you wants to give up. And every one of you here. You're already brave. Applause followed. Not because of what she said, but because they believed her. Because in her presence, the impossible felt tangible. She broke the session into groups, letting the more experienced students guide the new ones. Jessica helped a middle school girl from out of district learn how to break a grip. Brad worked with a tall, awkward boy who barely knew how to hold a stance. The gym wasn't just a place to learn to defend. It was a place to unlearn shame. To rediscover self-worth. To stand taller without needing to raise your voice. Later that night, as Emily walked to her car under the cold glow of the parking lot lights, she noticed it. A figure at the edge of the lot. Standing still. Watching. No movement. No words. Just presence. She stopped walking. Her breath came slower. Measured. Her phone was in her hoodie pocket. Her keys between her fingers. The figure didn't move. After a few long seconds, it turned and disappeared behind the tree line. Emily didn't chase. She didn't shout. She just stood there, heart steady, gaze hard. A message had been sent. Not by the figure. By her. She saw them. And she wasn't afraid. The next day, someone had tagged the gym's back door with red spray paint. 3 words. "You're next, leader." Jessica saw it first. Her hands trembled. "We should clean it up," she said. Emily looked at it, then shook her head. "No. Leave it." "Why?" "Because I want them to know something." She walked to the locker, pulled out a roll of tape, and stuck a note beneath the spray-painted words. "Just 4 more words, written in sharp, black marker, then come find me." And with that, the storm had been fully welcomed. Not out of defiance. Out of truth. Because when fear knocks, the brave don't hide. They open the door. And Emily Harris had just unlatched the deadbolt. The auditorium swelled with a strange mix of nerves, nostalgia, and restless excitement. Graduation at Lincoln High had always followed a predictable script: caps tossed, speeches made, futures imagined. But this year, everything felt different. The chairs were packed tighter. The applause hit louder. The air carried more than just hope, it carried reverence. Because sitting in the second row of students, her black gown pressed perfectly, her hands folded in her lap like they weren't born to form fists, was Emily Harris, the girl who had walked into this town invisible and was now, unmistakably, its anchor. Principal Anderson took the podium, running through the usual introductions and acknowledgments. Teachers beamed. Parents wiped tears. And then he said, "Before we begin the final roll call, we have a student speaker. You all know her name. But I don't think any of us truly knew her until this year. Please welcome, Emily Harris." The crowd erupted. Students leapt to their feet before she reached the microphone. Flashbulbs popped. Parents clapped like they were at a championship bout. Emily stepped onto the stage without a tremble. She looked out at the sea of faces, some proud, some curious, many changed by her story. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it all. "When I first came to Lincoln High," she began, "I didn't want anyone to know who I was. I thought if I stayed quiet enough, I could avoid problems. That silence would keep me safe. That if I folded myself small enough, the world wouldn't notice me, and I wouldn't have to fight anymore." She paused. The room held its breath. "But I learned something here. Problems find us whether we hide or not. And then we have a choice: give in or stand up. Stay small or become something more." Murmurs of agreement moved through the crowd. "I didn't set out to start anything. I didn't plan to become anyone. I just couldn't keep pretending I was okay with letting fear win. Not mine. Not yours. Not anyone's." Her voice grew stronger. "We live in a world that teaches us to shrink. To stay silent when something feels wrong. To avoid conflict even when injustice stares us in the face. But I learned that bravery doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it's just standing when others sit. Speaking when your voice shakes. Refusing to disappear when you know you're needed." In the front row, Sarah Harris wept quietly, her hands clasped under her chin. Brad sat beside her, chin lowered in a nod of respect. Jessica gripped the edge of her chair, not blinking. "So this is my message to you," Emily continued, her eyes scanning the crowd. Whether you're heading to college, joining the workforce, staying in Maplewood or leaving it behind, don't shrink. Don't stay quiet when something inside you says to speak. Be the person you needed when you were younger. Be the one who stays when others leave. Be the reason someone else finds their strength. She paused one last time. Because each of us is born with the power to be more than just a survivor. We can be shields. We can be sparks. We can be the first to stand, and never the last. A full second passed after she finished before the first clap broke the silence. Then a wave followed. Not polite applause, but an eruption. Students stood. Teachers clapped until their hands reddened. Parents whistled, cheered, cried. Emily stepped down without fanfare, returning to her seat with the same quiet determination that had defined her since day one. When her name was called for the diploma, the cheers doubled. When she walked across the stage, the crowd rose again. Not out of obligation, but out of something deeper. Gratitude. Recognition. She didn't just graduate. She transformed the meaning of what it meant to grow up here. After the ceremony, the courtyard buzzed with pictures, hugs, and final goodbyes. Emily stood to the side, speaking with a few students from her program, when a man approached. Mid-30s, serious face, government ID clipped to his belt. "Miss Harris?" he asked. She turned. "Yes. My name's David Quinn. I'm with the state's Youth Violence Prevention Council. I watched your fight with Simone Kelly. I read the incident reports. I've been following what you've built here. And I think it's time we talked about expanding it." Emily's eyes narrowed slightly. "Expand how?" He smiled. "Statewide. We want to fund and pilot a version of your program in 5 high schools. With you as the lead advisor." Emily blinked. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow down to that one sentence. She thought of every bruise, every message, every whisper of doubt. And then she saw the kids who still needed someone to believe in them. Someone who had been through the fire and still chose to build. "Let's talk," she said. That night, Emily walked home under the stars, her diploma clutched under one arm, 100 new doors opening in her mind. She paused on her porch, looked up at the sky, and whispered into the dark, "I didn't just survive. I started something." And in that moment, with the night warm around her, she knew, the fight wasn't over. But now, it was hers to lead. The summer after graduation arrived like a soft exhale. The kind of stillness that follows a storm, not the end of something, but the pause before the next chapter. Emily's days became a blur of training consultations, planning meetings with the Youth Violence Prevention Council, and quiet moments where she simply allowed herself to feel. Feel the weight she'd carried. The relief of having made it. The undercurrent of uncertainty about what came next. But amid the calls, the blueprints, and the growing list of schools waiting for her guidance, she received a message that felt more personal than any congratulatory letter or official proposal. It came from Brad. He texted her one afternoon, just 3 words, "Can we talk?" She hesitated before replying. Not because she feared him, those days were long gone, but because she knew what kind of courage it took to reach out when the world already saw you as the villain turned footnote. They met at a small coffee shop near the edge of town, a place neither of them had been before. Neutral ground. Brad was already sitting at a back table when she arrived, nervously spinning his iced coffee lid, eyes tracking every person who came through the door until he saw her. He stood, awkward and unsure, and for a second, she saw the boy he used to be, the one who had ruled the halls with arrogance instead of leadership. But when he sat back down, it was clear that version of him had been replaced by something quieter. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I wasn't sure you would." Emily nodded. "You asked." "I came." He chuckled, then looked down. "I never said it right. I apologized in the hallway, in front of people, and again during the hearing. But it was always about saving face. About being the guy who did the right thing after doing the wrong one. I never really owned it. Not deep down. Emily listened. Not interrupting. Not softening. Brad exhaled slowly. I used to hate you. Not because of who you were, but because of what you showed me about myself. You didn't need power to be respected. You didn't need fear to be followed. You didn't even want any of it. You just stood your ground. And I realized I'd built my whole identity on forcing people to move. He looked up, eyes red but dry. I don't want to be that person anymore. I've been volunteering at the shelter. I'm studying social work. I've been working with younger kids who remind me way too much of myself. He paused. And I tell them about you. Not just the fights. But how you changed this place. How you changed me. Emily didn't smile, but her eyes softened. You changed yourself, Brad. I didn't do that. I just didn't move when you pushed. He nodded, shoulders easing slightly. I'm applying to work with one of the schools in the pilot program, he said. The ones your self-defense model's expanding to. Emily raised an eyebrow. You're serious? Dead serious, he said. I don't want my story to end with me being the kid who learned a lesson. I want it to continue as the guy who helps others never need to make the same mistakes. He reached into his pocket and slid something across the table. A small, folded flyer. Reclaim Program, Conflict Resolution Through Personal Accountability. It had his name printed at the bottom, alongside a title, Assistant Facilitator. Emily picked it up, studied it, then looked him in the eye. Then show up. Every day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Brad met her gaze. I will. Good, she said. Because redemption isn't a one-time act. It's a practice. As they walked out of the coffee shop, the sun broke through the cloud cover, casting warm light across the sidewalk. They didn't part as friends, not exactly. But as two people who had once stood on opposite ends of a war and now stood, quietly, on common ground. That evening, Emily returned to the gym, the original gym at Lincoln High, now cleared for renovations and slated to become the first official pilot location of the stand. Don't sink. Initiative. She walked the echoing space alone, fingers grazing the edges of the mats, each corner filled with memory. And there, tucked behind the old supply closet, she found something she hadn't noticed before. A note, sealed in plastic, nailed into the wood. It read, to the one who stood when no one else did, thank you. You didn't just change the school. You changed the story. For all of us. There was no signature. It didn't need one. She folded it and slipped it into her jacket pocket, heart steady. Because for the first time, she saw it clearly, her legacy wasn't just in the punches thrown, the threats endured, or the battles won. It was in the people who were still standing because she had refused to fall. And that was a victory deeper than any fight could ever give her. The train station buzzed with the soft chaos of departures. Steam hissed from beneath the platform, suitcases rattled across tile, voices tangled in half-spoken goodbyes. Emily Harris stood at the edge of the waiting crowd, one hand clutching her ticket, the other resting lightly on the strap of the duffel bag slung across her shoulder. She wore jeans, sneakers, and a jacket patched at the elbow, not the image of a hero, but exactly herself. Behind her, the town of Maplewood exhaled its final breath of summer, and ahead, a new city waited, new faces, new schools, new challenges. But she wasn't leaving as the same girl who had arrived a year ago. That girl had tried to disappear. This one had become unforgettable. A small crowd had gathered to see her off. Jessica was there, trying not to cry, her curly hair tucked behind her ears. Brad stood beside her, arms crossed, giving Emily a nod that said everything words couldn't. Ava and Sophia waved from a bench nearby, each holding a small homemade sign that read, "Thank you, Emily." Even Principal Anderson had come, his tie crooked and eyes misty. But the one who stood closest was her mother, Sarah Harris, proud and quiet, her hand resting on Emily's back as they stared down the tracks together. "You ready?" Sarah asked. "More than I've ever been," Emily replied. As the train began to roll into the station, a sudden breeze swept through the platform, tugging loose strands of her hair across her face. She turned to the group behind her, eyes sweeping over each face she'd come to love, fear for, fight beside. "This isn't goodbye," she said, voice clear. "This is just the next chapter. Keep the program going. Keep standing up. And remember, strength isn't about never getting knocked down. It's about getting back up, every time, until the world learns it can't stop you." Jessica stepped forward and hugged her tight. "You changed everything," she whispered. "No," Emily said, pulling back, "we did." Brad offered a fist bump, one she returned with a smile. "Go change the world, Harris," he said. "Already started," she replied. She stepped onto the train as the final boarding call echoed down the platform. The doors slid shut behind her, and as the train pulled away, she watched Maplewood shrink in the window, each building, each person, each memory folding into the past, but not fading. Never fading. Because her story wasn't staying behind. It was going with her. In her hands. In her voice. In the ripple of every person who had ever watched her stand up and thought, maybe, just maybe, I can too. Months passed. The Stand. Don't Sink. Initiative launched in 5 schools. Then 10. Then 20. Emily traveled across counties, then across state lines, speaking, teaching, building the program one gym at a time. She didn't chase fame. It found her anyway. News outlets told her story. Parents called her a role model. Students wrote letters, some of them heartbreaking, others defiant, all of them laced with a kind of hope she once thought impossible. But she stayed grounded. Every new city reminded her of the old one. Every new student reminded her of the girl she used to be. And in Maplewood, something remarkable began to grow. The original gym was renamed the Harris Center, and above the door hung a plaque with her photo, Emily Harris, class of 2013. Beneath it were 6 simple words, "She taught us how to stand." New generations of students read her name, saw her face, learned her story. Not from legend. From truth. Because the legacy she left behind wasn't just written in what she survived, it was written in what she gave. One afternoon, a girl named Lila stood beneath the plaque, fists clenched at her sides, heart pounding. She'd been cornered in the hallway that morning. Mocked for the way she dressed, the way she spoke. She had said nothing. She had swallowed her fear. But now, reading the words on the wall, something shifted. She turned, walked to the gym, and stepped onto the mat. "Teach me," she said to the instructor. "I'm tired of shrinking." And in that single moment, the legacy repeated. Quiet. Powerful. Unstoppable. Because Emily Harris had taught them something that couldn't be unlearned. That courage doesn't come with applause. It comes with choice. And every time someone chose to rise, to resist, to speak, to stand, that choice carried her name. Not as a legend. But as a spark. A girl who fought back, and never stopped giving others the strength to do the same. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?